Hello and welcome to our weekly Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Saving Grace in America, a Secret History. I'm so happy to introduce to you today Shripad Anandinath Das Babaji Maharaj. He was initiated into the Babaji lineage of Lord Narasimha by His Holiness Dhadariya Baba Maharaj of the Rendha Temple in Brahmagiri, Jagannath Puri in 1984. Dhadariya Baba was 121 years at that time, and he gave Anandinath Baba his Shalagram Shila, which his Guru Chintamani Baba had given him. And Chintamani Baba lived to over 300 years old. We're so lucky today to have this fortunate presentation. So thank you so much, Anandinath Prabhu, for being with us today.
Okay. Friends, thank you for joining with us today. I have a special presentation for those of you who are familiar with the Hare Krishna movement, for example, inaugurated by Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktivedanta Swami and everything. I think you'll find this incredibly interesting and informative. This has never been done before in history, and we're doing it for the first time here on today's session. This is the secret history of Mahaprabhu's saving grace coming to America. And I'm going to give you the whole history going back to the early period of the 1890s, and it really got started in 1904. Now that's going to start off with a little bit of a shock to many people who thought that Srila Prabhupada started the movement. Now, of course, he was the Avesh of Lord Nityananda, which means the dress of the Lord Nityananda, who was the Prima Avatar with Lord Chaitanya. So Prabhupada was the Shakti Avesh avatar, and he was able to take the movement and explode it worldwide in a very dynamic way. So starting out, I just want to give you a little disclaimer here. First of all, I'm highly unqualified to present all these saints to you. I not worthy to even touch their feet, but I've touched the feet of many great saints in India in my travels there, and my Guru Maharaj, my Sannyas Guru Dhadariya Baba, but also I am initiated by Srila Sridhar Maharaj, Prabhupada, Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada is my Siksha Guru. I started learning from him in 1974, looking back, and it's been a magical journey ever since, just tremendous. But so after 35, almost 40 years of intense study of the Vaishnava history and the movement of the Vaishnavas, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and also from the other four Sampradayas, the Ramanuja Bhagavan, Nimbarka Bhagavan, Sampradaya, etc. It's just been incredible. And you have Vallabhacharya lineage of the Sri Vaishnavas, and the whole path is just very exciting. But particularly today, we're focusing on Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and how his mercy gradually came to America. Sri Chaitanya said that he wanted his name and the name of Krishna, Hare Krishna, chanted in all villages and towns. And some thought he's referring to India. And of course, it certainly went India wide very quickly when Mahaprabhu was present on earth. But later he, expressed that the whole Jagat, the whole universe, literally, he meant. So what to speak of this little earth planet that we're living on? He wanted it to spread here. Well, let's get started. We're going to start out right here with Premananda Bharati Maharaj. This is a picture of him here. This is from 1904. And Premananda Das Bharati Maharaj came to the United States. Now, keep in mind, this is going to be a very lengthy and detailed seminar on this topic, but I think you're going to find it quite interesting. I'll keep it very moving fairly quickly. I got to because I want to try to condense it into about an hour's time if I can, but I don't know because I've not rehearsed it out for the full amount. So it might go a little bit over that, but listen carefully. You're going to hear some amazing stories, amazing things of how this happens. So if you're a Vaishnav devotee, you're familiar with Hare Krishna, you've been around the movement and have some interest, you've studied there, or perhaps you've intensely practiced his teaching, you'll find it's quite nourishing and exciting. So Premananda Bharati Maharaj came to America in the late 1800s, maybe 1897, 98, around there. And he published his first book called Sri Krishna, Lord of Love in 1904. And this is a picture from that book. You see he's wearing Tulsi Kanta and regular Vaishnav tilak. And he was from the lineage where sometimes they have a little bit longer hair. It just depends. Some have shaved heads, some have longer hair. It just depends on the lineage. Now, Premananda Bharati was a successful writer prior to becoming a devotee. He was a very successful writer for newspapers, particularly in Calcutta and some of the bazaar, the gazettes in those major cities, also Mumbai and others, but mainly in Calcutta. When he was in Calcutta, he was having his success, and a friend asked him to a play, invited him to a play, and he said, "Oh, I like plays. What's it about?" He said, "This is about the life of Lord Chaitanya." He said, "Okay, let's go." So here he is, all successful, living a good lifestyle and everything in Calcutta, the urban times back in the late 1800s. It was a time of the British rule and Gandhi, and you had the people were generally interested in philosophy and theosophy, which is what it was called, like these Christian hybrid blends of Vedic knowledge and Christianity. And so he goes to this play on Lord Chaitanya. And the fact is when it was done, he was stunned. I mean, he talks about this in his book. He was so struck by the life of Lord Chaitanya because everybody knew about Lord Chaitanya, especially in Calcutta, which is part of the whole Bengal and everything. And he was struck, and his life changed that night. That night, he went home and he just said, I've got to become a follower of Lord Chaitanya. I've got to start myself on this path. So he immediately made plans, quit his job, quit all his work, left his fame behind, and started traveling throughout India looking for a guru who could help enlighten him on Lord Chaitanya. And he traveled and met many saints and sages, but none seemed to have what he was looking for, which is that pure bhakti taught by Lord Chaitanya. Finally, high up in the Himalayas, he met a saint that told him, go to Radha Kund. So this saint happened to know something about what he was looking for. He could read him psychically, he could read his inner desires, and he knew exactly what to tell him. He said, go to Radha Kund. Now, many of you may or may not be familiar with Radha Kund, but that is considered to be like the epochs of the followers of Lord Chaitanya and Radha Krishna. So if you're not familiar with that, then you'll have to, do a little side study. If you want, you can be prepared to take a lot of notes on my seminar today. If you're highly interested in this topic and you're going to be able to research everybody I show here way in depth. Again, I've been doing this research for over 35 years. So you can imagine if you put additional 10 to 20 hours in after with the links and information I give you today, you'll be fascinated. So Premananda Bharati went to Radha Kund, and there in Radha Kund, after he'd been living there for about a year and practicing the deep tapasya and austerities of the practice, Lord Chaitanya came to him in a dream and told him to go to the United States. He was actually awoken from the dream because it was such a shock because he had that darshan. Everybody who does this practice wants to get darshan of the Lord. And Sri Chaitanya came to him and said, go to the United States. Well, he just continued with his practice, talked to a few of his friends and associates there at Radha Kund, and they were all amazed and marveled by it. And I think he maybe just got some advice. Well, you're new here. You've been here a year. Take some time and see what happens. Well, lo and behold, it was about a year later that he writes, like everything I'm showing you today, this is just pure raw history. None of this is my opinion or my version or any of that. It's all just raw history. And I'm a researcher by trade. That's how I make my living, as a professional researcher in many different things. So, I'm very good at just giving you the raw information and facts according to what has come to us as researchers. So those nice devotees there in Radha Kund advise him, wait a year or so, see what happens. Well, lo and behold, Lord Chaitanya reached out again in his dream and said, go to America. And it was that was what was happening at the time. And that was the arrangement. So the Lord's first in history, what we've seen in the modern era, not in ancient times, our sampradaya goes back over 5,000 years. Actually, it goes all the way back to Vivasvan, the sun god, which was millions of years ago. So 5,000 plus millions. That's how old this sampradaya that I'm representing is in. And that's why I said earlier, the disclaimer, that I don't feel qualified at all to represent this ancient sampradaya, but somehow this is what I'm being guided to do as well, for the benefit of those sadhaks or practitioners who are familiar with his teaching, especially. And if you're new, it'll be a good education for you. This has never been done before in history, this type of presentation. So I mentioned that earlier, and I think it's a good idea to do it today. So he, so Prem Bharati came to America, and he had about 5,000 followers. He published this book called Lord Krishna, Sri Krishna, Lord of Love. Now I'm going to be flipping my screen around a little bit. Don't mind, it's just to keep, it's because I'm working off of a kind of a self-made slide of all these different things. Here's the book here, Premananda Bharati, Sri Krishna, Lord of Love. And this is a picture of the Lord Hari, Lord Krishna, lifting Govardhan Hill. And you can see the various sadhus and the Nagababas and everything in the pictures and all the people. It's a very old picture. And Krishna is incredibly black here, Shama Sundar form, and he's holding up the uh, the hill here. This is the Govardhan Hill, which is a sacred place in Vrindavan, and that's the cover of his book. And when you read the book, it reads, for the majority of it that he's discussing everything, is just like reading from Prabhupada's book in one sense, the general and complete Vedic philosophy of the universe and things like that. So it's quite astounding. Now, if you want a quick glimpse, you can see these little things here. This is from Amazon.com. You can go over to Amazon, search Sri Krishna, Lord of Love, Premananda Bharati. And, you know, where they say, have a quick look, you can look through the book and get a glimpse of the writing and the introduction. You know how they have those in the, you can do that here. And that'll be very good way to start your research. If you've never heard of this, I'm sure it's quite astounding, because there's been kind of this general, well, let's call it a myth or sort of, you know, way of presenting that there was never anything happened in America and then Prabhupada came and Krishna consciousness exploded around the world. Well, that's true, because he was and is still to this day the living Shakti-Avesh avatar of Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda, Nityananda Bol, Nityananda Bol. So because of that position as the Avesh of Lord Nityananda, it is by that mercy he was able to explode it all over the world and affect all of us generally. I mean, all this kirtan and bhakti fest and all of these things you see going on, all is because of Lord Chaitanya and from Prabhupada bringing that kirtan to the West and having devotees everywhere. So it was a great mercy of Lord Chaitanya and Srila Prabhupada. But moving forward, if you read Sri Krishna, Lord of Love, you can buy the book on Amazon. And thanks to Neil Delmonico, a person I used to long ago, 30, 40 years ago, had association with, he came out with some really rare books on Lord Chaitanya. He had left ISKCON around that time and was living, I think, in Radhakund for a while too. But Neil Delmonico got this book published. He's a brilliant researcher and author in his own right, and brought out some very esoteric things. And at that time, I had one of the biggest leaders in ISKCON living with me as a close friend. Mukunda Maharaj was his name. You can see he has books himself about the very, very early days with him and Prabhupada walking down the street doing business. He'd have his briefcase and they're just organizing, you know, setting up the ISKCON foundations and everything. So good friend of mine, currently lives in New Zealand, and he used to tell me that he was asking me about Neil Delmonico and everything. So what I want to do next, let me see if I can blow this up just right here. What's important to understand too is that because he was such a sincere soul, Premananda Bharati said, if I'm going to go to America, Lord Chaitanya, on your order, I want to take sannyas. I think it's important that I dedicate my life completely and surrender my life and take to the order of sannyas. So at that time, this is a picture here of Lokanath Baba. Lokanath Baba, Premananda Bharati went and got his association. He asked around Radhakund and everywhere, and everybody said, "Oh, you are from Bengal, the the best person for taking sannyas," because there was no sannyas line in Lord Chaitanya's movement ever until Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati basically invented it. He invented that for Lord Chaitanya's line. So Premananda Bharati had that inner divine wisdom and understanding and sincerity, mainly sincerity, that I must take sannyas. So he went to Lokanath Babaji here, pictured here at age 250 years old approximately. And this picture was taken, this is a copy of the original. I have the original here at our Akshayabat Vishnu Vamsivat Radhakrishna Temple in Nirguna Beach, California. We have the original photo that was taken by the king of Baroda. I'm going to tell you a little history of Lokanath Baba, which will blow your mind. He was first found. He had been practicing under his guru since a young boy. He's a lifelong celibate, and he had been practicing under his guru. And Lokanath Baba, then after his guru passed away, he moved to the Himalayas, and he stayed in this one particular cave. And at that time, some pilgrims were hiking up in the Himalayas, and the winter had just kicked in a few months before, and they were still roughing it up there, but they had stayed under some shelter and started coming back down off of the top of one of the mountains, and they saw a cave in there. It was very cold, so they were heading down until the spring came back. But right when they looked in the cave, said, "Let us just see if there's a Maha Siddha in this cave." And they went in there, and frozen in a block of ice was Lokanath Baba, sitting in this exact same position, frozen in a block of ice from the extreme snow and cold of the Himalayas. So they made obeisances, and they went down from the Himalayas and vowed to come back definitely in the spring when all the snow would melt, because this was so astonishing to see this sadhu inside of a block of ice doing his meditation. So as they came back during the spring, when the snow and everything had melted, the streams were full, the birds were chirping, the Himalayas, just the most lovely time, the spring. They hiked back into this cave. They made very careful notes how to find this cave. They went back to the cave, and they found Lokanath Baba. Now all the ice was gone, and he was sitting there. They made their darshan to him, and finally he gave a gesture. If they had some question, they wanted to speak something, they may speak. And they began a conversation with him, and he told them about his life and how he's been in this cave for a long time. And he said, summer comes and winters come, the snow comes, the snow ices. What is it? This is life. This is nothing astonishing. Of course, for us to picture someone, a siddha on that level, to have lived that long and to be able to stay in that kind of condition, frozen in a block of ice, and not be dissuaded from his meditation is an astonishing thing. So they convinced him, he wanted to move. They convinced him, you can bless so many people now. You're in your advanced age. You've done this tapasya up here. Kindly come with us down to the heartland of West Bengal, which is a city called Baroda. Out in the plains is Baroda. And in Baroda, Lokanath Baba took his seat there, and there's this plank of wood that he sometimes would lean up against. Usually he would sit straight up, and he would not use a plank, but it was just kind of there symbolically. And he never blinked his eyes. No one in years of taking his darshan when he was in Baroda ever saw him blink his eyes. His eyes were permanently like this. This is a photo. And the Baba Lokanath was very impressive character. And this photo was taken by the king of Baroda. A lot of times in ancient times, and still to this day, kings will come and they will see a Mahatma or a great sadhu, and they will go and because they're Vedic kings, and they take the blessings from them and ask for advice, and because they know they can see into the future. How will this battle go with this group? This one group's attacking us. Shall we do this, that? And actually sadhus would give them that type of advice on occasion. So this king, after 2 or 3 darshans with Baba Lokanath, came to him with a camera crew, and he begged Lokanath Baba, please, I want to put a picture of you in my palace. Many thousands of people are coming there every year. They'll be blessed by getting your darshan through your picture. And Baba Lokanath said, no, why bother? And he kind of lightly dissuaded him from taking the picture, and he reapproached him later that day. He said, please, so many would be blessed by this, and I will make the photo available. This is a new thing called photography, because as I mentioned, Kodak had just come into India in the late 1890s. And so this, because he was a king, he had the wealth, the Kodak camera and equipment was available to him. Kodak was an American company. As you know, you've heard of Kodak film. They were just coming into India in the late 1890s, probably influenced by the British presence also there. So Baba Lokanath relented and said, if you think it'll help people like it's helping us now, just gazing at him, we're being helped. He says, then you may take the photo. Otherwise, the king knew taking it without permission would be the kiss of death, because not only would the Baba probably not appear in the photo, as other saints like Shirdi Sai Baba have done, where they tried to take a picture without permission and the picture came out blank. And that picture is available on the internet as well. Shirdi Sai Baba, one of the truly great saints like Lokanath Baba, who are adored in the Akshayabat Vishnu Vamsivat Radha Krishna temple. And so this picture is coming to us here now on the internet. We can see it and getting great darshan of the saint. So as I mentioned, Baba Lokanath lived very old, over 250 years, and then he died shortly a while after that. He went on pilgrimage for a while, and he actually left India and went into some of the other countries and lived with the tribals. And there's many stories about him. Again, if you want to do research, you can you can just start by going on the internet. There's a lot of little history films. A lot of them are in Hindi or Urdu, but you can watch them and get the idea if you want to do some more research. You can search YouTube. You can click on Baba Lokanath and stuff like that, just as you would to search. Well, an important point I want to make, though, now keep in mind, he was not Mayavadi. He was not from the Mayavadi school. He was a yogi, trained in very strict yoga discipline, Ashtanga yoga, eightfold path of yoga. And similar to Ramanuja Bhagavan, which is one of our great Vaishnavacharyas, Ramanuja Bhagavan taught also that a devotee should train first and master eightfold Ashtanga yoga to clean out the nadis in the body, to clean out the residual karma left from past lives and this current life, and to purify the entire system before approaching the higher teaching of Bhakti Yoga through Radha Krishna, and trying to approach Radha Krishna, Lord Nrsingadev, and these divine beings, these murtis, literally God, these God manifestations. One should practice Ashtanga Yoga. Baba Lokanath was of the exact same persuasion. He felt that you want to teach bhakti. He's telling Premananda about it. You want to teach bhakti is very good. And I think Lord Chaitanya, who of course he knew who that was, will bless you. And that is the mercy of his incarnation. But he was a little bit adamant about that people should first practice the eightfold yoga system, perfect that. Now that means entering samadhi in the eightfold yoga system. Once the great Acharya, Krishnamacharya, who actually all this modern yoga you see in all these yoga centers and bhakti festa, all that came from Krishnamacharya, who was a Ramanuja sadhu and was facilitated by a king to be able to set up his yoga studios. And that's how it spread throughout all of America to this day. And now we got like 4,000 yoga centers. Of course, they're all shut down now, but hopefully they'll be opening again soon, or many of them. But Krishnamacharya, once somebody asked him about samadhi, he said, oh, well, we're practicing eightfold yoga system with him, which is what he taught. He said, we'll get in samadhi. He says, you have no idea what samadhi is. He goes, well, what is it? A lot of conceited yoga people think they're in samadhi and they have no idea what it is. And Krishnamacharya, the founder of yoga sadhana here in America, especially, I mean, it really revamped the whole thing in the world. He told him, I'll have a pot of boiling water and you're sitting in samadhi. If you're in real samadhi, I can take that pot of boiling water, big pot, and pour it over your head and you won't even move. You won't even budge. And then the person got a little bit humble finally and said, oh, I see. let me keep practicing. So Baba Lokanath had this little bit of disagreement, um, lightly, because he could see that Premananda Bharati's heart was very good. He gave him sannyas. He says, now you're my sannyas disciple. I bless you to go to America and bring the teachings of Lord Chaitanya and Bhagavad Gita and Lord Krishna. So he was a vital element in this mercy lineage coming that led up to Srila Prabhupada, who was actually Shakti Avesh avatar of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, and blessed so many of us with his darshan and being able to learn the teachings. Nothing like Prabhupada's books. Anybody who wants to follow Gaudiya Vaishnavism, you have to start, become highly educated first in Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami's books. Otherwise, you won't be able to understand Vaishnavism. You'll just be kind of floundering around, and that's fine if you want to do that. It's your life. But I'm saying, if you're serious about the teaching, first study Bhaktivedanta Swami's books. God sent him as his avatar, as the Shakti Vesh avatar of Lord Chaitanya, and you'll benefit tremendously first. Moving on with our story, in line with what I was just telling about the Vaishnavism and the, I think there's a good size here. Let me try to blow it up just a little bit. Nope, back we go. This is B. Joy Krishna Goswami. Now, again, getting into some history here. B. Joy Krishna Goswami came from the line of Advaita Acharya. Advaita Acharya was the leading Vaishnava at the time when Mahaprabhu, before Mahaprabhu was born, Haridas Thakur was his disciple. Some of you who know about the history of Vaishnavism know, Gaudiya Vaishnavism know of Haridas Thakur. Bijoy Krishna Goswami was in the lineage of Advaita Acharya, who was the one who prayed to Shalagram Sila and brought the Lord down from Vaikuntha to come to earth and distribute the Harinam chanting in the Priti or the Bhava of Radha Krishna. Bijoy Krishna Goswami, you can see he's in the jata, the hairstyle, and thick beads, tulsis around the neck, and the dress, the Vesha, water pot of Advaita Acharya, who was of this type of Vesh, a yogi, a Vaishnav yogi. And with tilak, of course, Vaishnav tilak. This is a very, very old, rare picture. Bijoy Krishna Goswami, as an interesting side note, he got caught up in this thing called Brahmo Samaj. When the British invaded India, I call it invasion because that's what it was, They had no right to invade India, call them heathens and all this stuff. That's a whole other subject, but I get a little angry when I think about it sometimes. But during this period, they were pushing Christianity down everybody, telling you heathen Hindus need Christianity. Well, being how Hindu people are very humble and everything, and they started reading different things. And the Rabindranath Tagore, the famous poet, came out. And incidentally, Bhaktivinoda Thakur was very close with his family, especially his brother was a very close friend of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And as Rabindranath Tagore is getting famous for his poems and everything, mega famous in India, they would have discussions about Vedic philosophy and philosophy of Christianity and things like that. And Bijoy Krishna Goswami, at that time, there was this group called the Brahmo Samaj. And Vedic historians and most Indian people remember this if they know their history. Brahmo Samaj was sort of a hybrid compromise of Christianity and basic impersonal Vedic knowledge. We're all one with God and God is one. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur also was involved, not with Brahmo Samaj so much, but with this. He really respected Christianity. And he says in his writings that, and we'll get into that in a little bit here, that he really respected the idea of Jesus and Jesus as the Son. In other words, the Son and the Father in the Son are one. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati also was very into this. When Christians would approach him and try to be challenging, he would say, I really like this idea because this is our teaching of God the Father, God as the Son, God as the Mother, our Mother, and God as the beloved, like the gopis. You see these different relations. God as a friend, the Shakti Rasa as friend, like the cowherd boys. So God, certainly God appearing as in the form of a son was a very well liked idea. And through the Vedic knowledge, they were able to introduce these ideas to the British, as well as the famous prophet of Radha Krishna known as Swami Narayan. And you can see Swami Narayan's huge, gorgeous temples all throughout America now, in the Los Angeles area, New Jersey, and many other places. Gorgeous town. He was a prophet of Radha Krishna, and he also had very good relations with the British people, and they helped him build temples in India. The British actually helped him, gave him money and supplies and everything because he was such a powerful preacher of Radha Krishna that he drove out a lot of the evil tantrics and a lot of criminals in the Gujarat area during that period. So the British government, they were afraid to go into Gujarat. There was so much crime and evil tantric practices that they actually couldn't conquer Gujarat. But Swami Narayan went in there, and he was so famous and popular. He was such a great siddha that he built up an army of Vaishnavas and soldiers, and he straightened up Gujarat very quickly over the years he was present there. Something to keep in mind. That was also during this period in the mid 1800s, early 1800s and mid 1800s, but this is a little bit later. But Bijoy Krishna Goswami, just a tremendous sadhu, but he got involved as Brahmo Samaj, and he became one of the top preachers for that Samaj. And the reason was he was really good at preaching because he had been a Vaishnava all his life, but somehow he needed the money, and he was trying to harmonize. You know, people try to do this harmonization thing with the public, and it doesn't work because when you're a devotee, your goal is not to harmonize with the public, but to help enliven them. The public is illusioned, and our goal is to help them become awakened to the priti, or love of Lord Chaitanya, love of God, love of Radha Krishna. Radhe Govinda, Radhe Govinda, Radhe Govinda, Radhe Govinda, Radhe Govinda. Chanting his name constantly and perpetually is the goal. So that's the marga, or the path that we follow. So after Brahmo Samaj, Advaita Acharya meeting Lokanath Baba. Now this is the main key I wanted to talk about. Coming back to Lokanath Babaji, he met him and they had literally arguments. How Baba Lokanath would say, nope, must practice eightfold yoga system first to purify all the nadis, the heart, all the karma, then come to bhakti yoga. He was a bhakti advocate, but his idea was he's seen very, very, very few people at that time, and he met many yogis that were qualified for bhakti because they had not completed Ashtanga yoga to the point of where they were qualified to approach Radha and Krishna and bhakti. Bijoy Krishna came in and argued with him about the history of Lord Chaitanya. Now he is the Prema avatar, he's a mercy avatar, and that's the name of our talk today. Lord Chaitanya, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Saving Grace in America, the secret history. And now you're seeing maybe some things you haven't heard of before, and it's becoming revealed to you. This was a key figure. Now he didn't come to America, but he was a key figure in going along with Brahmo Samaj, kind of harmonizing with the Christians and the British and all that, which was a good service, but a mundane service. Later realizing it was mundane, coming back to Gaura Hari and Lord Hari, and he had thousands of disciples. And he would come sometimes with many disciples to see Baba Lokanath for his blessing on those disciples that they would become more advanced in their bhakti. But privately, they would sit and have little arguments. And one day when he was getting ready to pass away, Bijoy Krishna, he had moved and went to Vrindavan. He was living in Vrindavan. He had a kutir there and was staying. And Baba Lokanath was communicating with him telepathically. And he said, I want to come to Vrindavan to see you. And people actually saw this. Now, it's hard to believe if you haven't seen it, but these type of siddhas have this power. They wrote, we would see Baba leaving Baroda, and he said he was going to Vrindavan to be with Krishna, Bijoy Krishna Goswami, who was going to be passing away soon. And they saw him flying through the air, making mystic symbols on his fingers as he floated through the air. And this was actually seen by people that they said they had seen this. Pretty astonishing. But that's a little bit of history there about Premananda Bharati, how he was initiated in the sannyas by Lokanath Baba and Bijoy Krishna Goswami in relation to that, and in relation to Premananda Das Bharati. So we're moving on now further into the history here. And the next person we come to, I'm going to skip ahead and then bring this one back up here. I'd like to introduce you to Mahanam Brati Brahmacharya, lifelong brahmachari, Mahanam Bharati, or Mahanam Brata Brahmachari, a wonderful, wonderful saint who came to America in 1933. It was right around this period. He came from Faridpur, West Bengal, and he went to the World Parliament of Religions in 1933, where he was invited to speak. He had gotten a letter. Somehow they heard about him in India, a great Vaishnava, and a doctor, a professor, and he came to teach about Lord Chaitanya and Vedic philosophy at this meeting at the Parliament of Religions in 1933. Now, you may have heard the famous story of Vivekananda, who spoke at the Parliament of Religions in the 1890s, and that was the first introduction to like Hinduism in America, and it's famous for that. He was from a different lineage, but this was the first Vaishnav who came and spoke at this conference in 1933. Now, interestingly enough, at this time, 1933 was just about the time that the Gaudiya Math was getting started in India. Hadn't yet expanded. Bhaktivinoda Thakur passed away in 1914. So, you know, I'll get to that part of the story, but I'm just saying in 1933, when Mahanamrata came to America and started developing followers, Gaudiya Math was just getting started. There was like 2 members, and I'll go over that a little bit in a bit here. But he was a follower, Mahanamrata Brahmacharya was a follower of a famous child Avadhut named Jagadbandhu. And if you want to look up Jagadbandhu, you can see modern day darshans. They have the Mahatsov, the 100-year Mahatsova of Mahanamrata Brahmachari. They still have, he was very, very well known there. And a little history for you. So he gave that talk. He later went on and actually joined the Chicago College there, wrote a thesis on Vaishnava theology where he got his PhD in that. And he became known for his association with a famous religious thinker, Thomas Merton. If you're an American historian of all the famous transcendentalists and religious thinkers of America, Thomas Merton was one of the key ones. And he really adored Mahanamrata Brahmachari. And he said the main thing I got from him was how important brahmachari was. In other words, celibacy, whether male or female, how important that was for expanding your communion with God. Now, after he returned to India, he only stayed a short while, about, I believe, 6-7 years, and returned to India. And again, if you want more in-depth history, you can take any of these key words of these people, these saints I'm telling you about, and you can do a deeper search if you want. But he returned to India because the Bangladesh partition was in place. It was that period. There was a lot of destruction and war. The Muslims were destroying the Hindu temples and the deities. There was a lot of turmoil. And so he had returned to, and Bangladesh has always been a problem since then. And one of the famous saints we're going to talk about later is Huddy Georgeson, or George Harrison, the famous musician. And he was the first rock star who started the Bangladesh Concert for Bangladesh. So the very first rock concert to raise money was done for Bangladesh, India. And that's what caused Mahanamrata Brahmachari, where he was from in Faridpur, to go back to Bangladesh area. And he didn't give up on America. He had accomplished a lot there and did what he went to do. He made a lot of disciples, including Thomas Merton, one of the most famous religious thinkers in America at that time, heavily influenced him and thousands of others, came back and he became very busy in India, basically just doing restoration of temples and preaching and encouraging the Hindu people, the Vaishnavas, to be strong and get through this period of the partition period. He was busy reconstructing temples, restoring destroyed temples, Vaishnav temples, reinstalling deities, and teaching Vaishnav theology. He had thousands of followers, still does in India. You can look him up. He's passed away since then. But look here, I'll show you. He was so famous worldwide. Let me shrink this down a little bit here. This is an article when he passed away in memorandum of Dr. Mahanam Brata Brahmachari, 1904 to 1999. So he just passed away at the turn of the year 2000 here. And this was published Sunday, 10/19/2014, and they were giving him respect, and they're talking, soft-spoken Hindu scholar. They don't really understand his position as a Vaishnava, but they're saying he gave encouragement to Roman Catholic monk and writer Thomas Merton. 15 years have passed since his last journey to the eternal world. It's a nice article. It's from, again, the Asian Tribune, striving for Asian solidarity. Everybody's always striving for political unity. Good luck. It'll never happen in this world. We have to keep trying, but boy, it's tough. Look at America now. We're being invaded by communism. We're under communist invasion. They're unleashing this disease on us. They own the media and they're pushing all this communist propaganda. It's absolutely disgusting. We got to fight, got to keep fighting. But basically, once you become a Vaishnava, you kind of leave that world aside. You'll stay tuned in on it if you're in the business world still, like I am, but ultimately you take on a higher goal in life, which is to surrender to Lord Hari and become advanced in that teaching. Mahanam Brata Brahmacharya Ki Jai, a great, great, great hero. And again, was a follower of the famous child Avadhu Jagat Bandhu, who many at that thought, they actually called it Neo-Vaishnavism because they felt, a lot of people did who knew Jagat Bandhu, they thought he was the return of Lord Chaitanya. Now keep in mind, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the Chaitanya Bhagavat promised that he would return twice. And I'm going to cover some of that in here and give you some ideas. I've already identified the first return. I'm kind of, which was Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. So Mahaprabhu is all merciful. He's not going to leave us abandoned. But during that time, a very, very major influence on this Vaishnavism coming to the West is the great Saint Radha Charandas Dev, who's pictured right here. And just a very unusual and great saint. I'm giving you a view of him in the photo here. I'll just leave it at that size. Radha Charandas Dev, oh my God, where can I get started? Just amazing. He was famous Siddha saint in Navadvip and Puri, and he became literally a living legend, a living Lord Chaitanya in the way he presented Krishna consciousness in India. Now, why does this have to do with the influence in India or America? Because at one period in his life, he really was trying to go to America and was trying to secure a visa and all. Because he had been a sadhu for so long, he had trouble getting the permission and some other circumstances he couldn't go. But he heavily influenced our first hero, Premananda Bharati Maharaj, who in his book, Lord Krishna, Lord of Love, in the back of that book, there's a discussion with Bharati Maharaj with Radha Charandas Dev. And it's an astounding discussion. He gives stuff that I'd never heard before and I'd never forget. I mean, amazing things. Radha Charandas Dev. So it was very important that he was associated with Premananda Bharati because by his mercy, his power, and his devotion to Mahaprabhu and the chanting of the holy names, he brought this teaching there. He is still adored and worshipped in Radhakund by the sadhus there, well known there for the mantra, Nitai Gaur Radhe Sham Japa Hare Krishna Hare Ram. This is sung by many of the devotees there. from that tradition. He was part of the tradition prior to the Gaudiya Math becoming established. Radhachandra Dev, he was a close friend of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and they would often be seen sitting together on Bhaktivinoda Thakur's veranda, his porch, having deep discussions about transcendence. More on that later. But mainly, Radhachandra Dev was known for his intense kirtans, which were historically very similar, the historians have told, like Nityananda Prabhu's, where he would dance and shriek the holy name with such intensity that people would go into a trance. They'd come out of the trance and they'd fall at his feet and say, you're my guru, because they were experienced the Vaikuntha world, the spiritual world, when they would hear him and he would glance at him just like Lord Nityananda used to do, and they would go into trance. He would have these kirtans and then gaze at them, and they go into a trance. Very astounding. In fact, one British administrator was driving by with two of his servants in the car. He's driving in a taxi by him, and he saw the kirtan. He said, slow down, roll down the window, and watched. And then he said, stop the car, pull it over. And he got out of the car. I mean, this was how influenced he was. And these people all thought, these Hindu heathens, they don't know anything about God. We're Christians. We have the correct teaching, et cetera, et cetera. Got out of the car and watched in the kirtan, literally with his mouth hanging open, just watching Radhachandra Dev shriek and spin and dance, and arms flailing, and all the people going absolutely mad in the kirtan. And he stopped and he hung his head down and he looked at his Hindus, his Indian servants who were helping him run, his department. And he said, God speaks to that person. When that person speaks, God's listening. That's all he could say when he saw what he was doing. He said, that person, that when God speaks, he speaks to that person and through that person. It was very astonishing to hear a British guy say that. So anyway, he brought people back from the dead through the chanting of Hare Krishna. Radhachandra Dev was a very powerful siddle, and there was records where once he went down to the crematorium, these devotees of his were crying, our boy has died, our boy has died. He went down there on their pleas, held him by the toes, chanted Hare Krishna, and the boy came back to life, walked off with his parents. That event had happened. And it happened several times with Radhachandra Dev. He once made a holy banyan tree dance, and all the people said, how can that be? This is impossible, because everybody's into this scientific crap back then, like they are now with all these phones, and you got to get a new phone that does 40 more things than the previous one. And I haven't learned what the previous one does, but you need this new phone. All this like hysteria and like cultic ridiculousness over this technology. I'm telling you, it's unbelievable. But people were starting to become like that in India back then, because the British are there and they're all scientific this and scientific that. So they said, something's going on. There's somebody up in the tree or something. So Radhachandra Dev said, here, he picked 3-4 village boys and sent them up into the tree, climbed up in the tree, and said, you stay up in the tree. And he started the kirtan again with his followers, circumambulating the banyan tree, and the banyan tree started dancing just like before. And the boys were up there monitoring everything, and they came down like just, with their eyes wide open, their jaw dropped. They said, nothing. We don't know. We're up there and the whole tree's dancing. Now, speaking of pandemics, we got this phony pandemic going now. I say phony because the disease was lab created and spread throughout America very quickly in 4 strategic, I think 4, maybe more, strategic locations. That's why all of a sudden 1 week, we got this pandemic. However, there is no coronavirus in China. They started it in Wuhan in labs with George Soros and other criminals who were a part of it. They spread it over here and around the world, but you don't ever hear about China having a problem with coronavirus. Something to think about. A little side note here, because I'm going to talk about pandemic. In Calcutta, and it's historically there was a plague that was so bad and so vicious that there were dead bodies piled up on the streets, and even the dogs wouldn't eat the dead body. Usually a dog is hungry, is going to eat that meat, but they wouldn't, because they knew that they had this plague that was going around. People were cowering in their homes with such fear. Radha Charandas Dev gathered his army of devotees, says, let us go to Calcutta and see what happens. Let us stop this plague. With complete 1,000% conviction, we will stop this plague now. Let us go to Calcutta. And he took his group of devotees, and they had to walk. For if any of you, they were in Puri at that time. If anybody of you've been to India, and you know from Puri to Calcutta, that's quite a hike, you know. But they did it. No food, no place to stay, no necessarily clean water, no medical facility, just all followers of Radha Charandas Dev saying, we believe in him, we will go and we will engage in kirtan. Nobody cried like a little crybaby, oh, well, how we find food? Nobody did that. They were pure transcendentalists, committed transcendentalists. No crybaby crap, just straight, real, and ready to take on this pandemic, which in India often they believe they took the form of a goddess. Radha Charandas Dev went in there with his army and marched day and night, no sleep, no food, day and night, up and down the main streets in Calcutta, through the alleys and everywhere. The dead bodies were piled and the flies zooming around them and the people screaming and all the craziness, chanting this Nitai Gaur Radhe Shyam, Japa Hare Krishna Hare Ram, screaming and wailing at the top of their lungs, driving out the plague. And the plague left Calcutta shortly after they were there. And it was such a huge thing. Two things happened. Number one, the Calcutta Bazaar, the Calcutta Gazette, they had two papers, the Gazette and the Bazaar. They both ran huge articles how this sadhu came from Puri and chased away the plague with his chanting of the holy name. And naturally, Hindu readers and people of the papers were charmed, and they saw, and he became known as a great Avadhuta, Mahapurush. Some called him also the second appearance of Lord Chaitanya because of his kirtan power and his ability to bring people back from the dead with the Hare Krishna mantra and chanting in Calcutta. And Srila Prabhupada also, on several lectures, I don't know where exactly, but I've heard him myself. I remember from the early days in the 70s when I was listening to his lectures up until now, you hear every now and then he'll talk about how devotees, he'll say devotees chanted in Calcutta and stopped the plague. So his divine grace also confirmed that he stopped the plague. And with that, and there's many other stories about Radha Charandas Dev. I just gave you a brief update here. Historically, keep in mind, he restored the famous Siddhabakul place of Lord Haridas Thakur, who was the main devotee in the movement of Mahaprabhu. He restored the Siddhabakul where Haridas Thakur used to chant 92 rounds at least every day. Sometimes some say 180 rounds, but in other words, only day and night, very minimal eating, maybe a glass of milk or something, but chanting the holy name like that. The disappearance samadhi, actually, he discovered the lost place where Mahaprabhu buried the dead body of Haridas Thakur after dancing with it after his disappearance. And that temple is there now, right on near the ocean. You can see it if you go to Jagannath Puri. Jai Jagannath. Very beautiful place. Make sure and circumambulate the Jagannath temple like you see me doing in that picture of me on the introductory flyer today. You see me standing outside the Jagannath temple. I was circumambulating it, chanting the name of Lord Jagannath, Lord Hari, Lord Gauranga, 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 Gaura Hari. He is the founder of what's called Pattabari, and they have the Mahatmanship, or whatever you would call it, the Mahatmanship of the Gambhira of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, where he spent his last years in Puri, Tota Gopinath Temple, Siddhabakul, and the Samadhi of Haridas Thakur, and other temples as well. It's very, very old traditional Vaishnava group prior to the advent of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and the Gaudiya Math. Now I'm going to go into that. Well, so much for the time. This seminar is going to be a little bit longer, but I hope it's keeping you excited enough to participate and understand what's going on here. This is the mercy that has come to anyone who's chanted Hare Krishna. If you've been to a Bhakti Fest, you've been to any of these things, any yoga centers, and you hear they have these kirtans there now, Chintamani and Jayadev go around to the yoga centers. I've played with them a few times at some of the yoga centers. We chant Hare Krishna. Any of this that of you that has heard this Hare Krishna, it's all because of the grace of this lineage of thread that I'm showing you today that came down. This has never been done before in the history of Hare Krishna America in the modern times, going back into the 70s when it all started, when Prabhupada came over here. No one's ever done a presentation like this. And I humbly am simply submitting that we're doing this for the benefit and the joy of all the Vaishnava sadhaks, and ideally to encourage others who are already practicing to overcome the disease of casualness, take it a little bit more intensely, and develop this priti or divine love for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Lord Gaurahari and Lord Radha Krishna. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that's our next stopping point here in this wonderful journey we're taking today. Beloved Bhaktivinoda Thakur. This is the book, by the way, if you want to read in depth on Radha Charandas Dev. This is a life of love, which Chintamani has. It's a rare book, hard to get. So I got her a copy as a gift. I think she might have ordered it on her own. It's still available. I forget. I have a copy I was going to give her, but I think she went and got one on her own because she's a very enterprising person. Starting this whole Zoom room and everything, that's her wonderful nature. My wonderful spiritual daughter, Chintamani Devidasi, and Jayadev, her companion. Radha Charandas Dev, the veritable embodiment of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's universal religion of love. If you get a chance, you want to dive in, go on the internet first. You can read a lot of stuff, and then you can get this book by O.B.L. Kapoor, by the way, a disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, great saintly person. His name was Adi Keshava, was his initiated name by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He wrote this book, which is just astonishing and wonderful. Bhaktivinoda Thakur here, this is a Murti of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, but it looks very lifelike, doesn't it? It's almost like kind of scary. We keep this picture here at the Akshayabat Vishnu Radha Krishna Vamsivat Temple in Nirguna Beach, California. And I love this picture, so I put it up for you can all see it. I'll shrink it a little so you can see the whole Murti, the whole form of the Lord, Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He is the guiding and Mahant and the father of the Krishna conscious movement in the modern age, with his son Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He's the pioneer of Lord Chaitanya's worldwide movement and the great founder, as I mentioned, of the Gaudiya Math, which is founded by his son, but he gave the seeds to that when they built a temple in Mayapur before, just after he passed away in 1914 is when Bhaktivinoda Thakur passed away. What can I say? There's just so much. He's the author of over 100 books, such as Sri Chaitanya, His Life and Precepts, which he sent purposely, hand-mailed himself to different libraries in Canada and other places to try to start moving it out. But as I've already shown and proven today in today's webinar, Chaitanya's mercy was already extending out through other channels into America, into the West. But he made this effort and it's very glorious. And Jaiva Dharma was another famous book, which was when I first joined with my Guru Maharaj, Srila Sridhar Maharaj, who was a disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and a good, close friend, and Siksha Guru of Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. More on him later. When I first came into the ashram and joined there, I was living in India in the ashram there, and he immediately came, one of his sannyasis came and said, gave me Jaiva Dharma. He said, we all read Jaiva Dharma here. Guru Maharaj says you must read Jaiva Dharma. And that was one of his principal books, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and many others. Like I said, he wrote over 100 books. Absolutely astonishing, brilliant person. Now listen to this, a little esoteric teachings about him. He was raised in a very wealthy Bengali family, a Shakta family, in other words, worshippers of Kali. And his family's wealthy, so they hosted many of these Kali festivals. And he wrote poems later as he started becoming more sensitive. He wrote poems questioning how the screaming of goats and bulls could be a true religion. he was questioning how this is wrong. When you're born and raised in something like that, especially if you're wealthy, because wealth makes you more illusioned. You don't want to question anything. You got money and wealth. You know, according to the material world, you've achieved the goal. So why question anything? But he later became very pensive. And here's why. I think because he was such an excessive meat eater, being part of a Kali family, he has some kind of a sickly life. His life was not always that healthy. And listen to this. Here's how he got started wanting to study Lord Chaitanya. Um, so he'd had these health problems, and he almost died as a young man of about 20 years old. It was a case of stomach colitis. He'd burn and burn. It's just so horrible thing. You got no peace at all because your stomach's always burning. You can't eat. You know, if you eat something, your stomach's going to start burning again. Drink some water. It helps a little. It's very hard. But in his being part of this whole group I was talking about earlier, this people who would sit like in the modern day cafes, but it was like that in British time. They'd drink chai and discuss philosophy. Vedic philosophy wasn't on the table as much. It was mostly Christian theosophy. Theosophists got their start. They Madame Blavatsky and these Westerners who'd come over, particularly her was kind of famous, but she was more on the lineage of like a witch. She was more following witchcraft and stuff like that. But anyway, that's a secret, another secret part of something to discuss at perhaps a future seminar. But and again, I want to say I have no I'm just humbly presenting all this information to you. I'm by trade a researcher. I make my living, pay my bills by being a researcher. So it's something I've been doing a long time, almost 44 years. And that's why I'm presenting all this to you, just sticking to the facts and to the history, not trying to give any opinions or anything like that. There's no need for that. I'm just bringing the history out here, and you can do your own research from the keywords that I give you. So jumping back in, Bhaktivinoda Thakur had this really bad case of colitis. He thought he was going to die. He basically felt he was going to die. And he happened to meet a mystic saint from the Kartabhaja lineage. Now, the Kartabhajas were one of the principal and probably the largest Sahaja sect. Prakrita Sahaja is the proper word. Sahaja, there's nothing wrong with Sahaja as a word. It means natural. But that's, again, another subject for another future darshan. But the Kartabhaja sect has always been, it still is very big in India, much shrunken down more. You're more familiar with the term the bowels. The bowels. The bowels are part of the Kartabhaja original sect. And one great mystic from there met Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He went to him, somehow heard about him. He'd given up hope from the modern medicine and the British medicine, went to this mystic, and he gave him this medicine, special herbal medicine, and a mantra. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur talks about his writings. It tasted terrible, but he followed it, and he chanted the mantras. And other than the traditional Kali and Durga mantras he chanted in his family, and the traditional chants at the festivals and all that, he never really chanted any mantras. But he chanted this mantra faithfully as a young man, around age 20, from this Kartabhaja mystic that gave him. And he told him, the Kartabhaja mystic told him he would have a dream where a large black snake would come out of him. Well, lo and behold, he took the medicine, started chanting the mantra. After a couple days, he had that sleep and that dream. And he had that dream, and he had the exact dream, a big black snake on it. And he groaned and moaned all night. And this dream, and this snake in his dream was climbing out of his body. And he was cured. And he went back to the mystic and made his obeisances. And believe it or not, many people might argue this isn't really opinion, but from his notes, you can see this. And if you just think about it logically, that was his first indirect connection to Lord Chaitanya, was from a Sahaja, this mystic, saintly Kartabhaja person. Saintly, I only say saintly because he had this knowledge of medicine and this mantra that he could cure this particular disease. And he could forecast that he would have this dream. And he apparently could see that there was like this black snake, or at least that was his personification in Bhaktivinoda Thakur, his body. So pretty astonishing idea to think that that's his original connection with Mahaprabhu. Well, guess what? He then later, shortly after that, in their, he'd go back to his social lives and their friendship with the Rabindranath Tagore's family, particularly his brother. And he knew Rabindranath Tagore, of course, but he was getting very famous for his poetry. You can look him up, Rabindranath Tagore, beautiful poetry, but kind of along this Brahma Samaj line, this kind of compromising the beauty of God in every leaf and flower type stuff, which is nice. But again, very Yogananda-ish type poems. He was like that too, a compromiser. And again, a lot of this could be for another seminar, but not important right now. But the idea that he was good friends with them, they were a very respected family, and they would have their discussions. And he gradually, as he was starting to study, he said, I was drawn back mysteriously. He says in his writing, mysteriously. And it seems apparent that after he was cured by that Kartabaja mystic, by somehow sort of like a sort of odd sort of sukriti or karma, he was drawn back into the Vedic knowledge in the Bhagavatam. And he said, I started realizing the Bhagavatam was the preeminent principal scripture for the Vedic knowledge. And then drawn back into Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and being such a brilliant person, he started writing and writing. He's like a phenomena, a writing phenomenon, author, a phenomenal author. Astounding. If you look at the list of all the books in the top, I mean, I've done it before. I've looked at them and it's just blown my mind. You go, how could someone have this much time? And because oddly, during this time, he had received a lot of respect from the British government because he had always been working and he was from a wealthy family. So they had appointed him as that time as the deputy magistrate of Jagannath Puri. Jai Jagannath. He was a deputy magistrate. There's a very, very big position. It's just under like the king almost, in the sense that he's in charge of all the affairs and all that. So he's living during that time. I'd have to check my timeline. I don't think the story I'm going to tell you now will blow your mind. I don't think at that time Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had been born, but I will tell you a quick story about that before I go on to this one. It was a little more lengthy, but Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, when he was born, his name was Bimal Prasad. And as a young child, the Rothkart, because their house, I've been to where their house was. It's in Jagannath Puri. That's kind of where my Janma Bhoomi is, in Puri. That's where I got my initiation into the line of the Narasingha. But the Rath Yatra cart used to come down the main road. Is right off the main road, and it stopped in front of his house, and it wouldn't budge for some reason. Everybody's astonished. Oh, what is Lord Jagannath doing, stalling here at Bhaktivinoda Thakur's house? He was a famous person because being the magistrates already knew him, but somehow the Lord's stopping right here at his house, and he's not budging. The cart's not budging. It wasn't because the people stopped pulling it. Everybody's pulling, and let's move it, move it, move it. They couldn't get it going. So and then at one point, his wife held little Bimal Prasad up there, and a garland fell off Lord Jagannath onto the child. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj ki jai. Ki jai. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj ki jai. So this is a very magnificent devotional future for Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. But I want to tell you about one particular very important story that happened to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and I'm going to read it directly out of from a scholar that I admire a lot, who once stayed at my house. This was long ago, but he was a Vaishnava scholar, and he stayed at my house. But I want to read you his version, and I condense it a little. So bear with me. Take a few minutes. You'll be amazed. The chastisement of the mystic Bisha Kishen. Now remember, the British were the rulers at this time. They had appointed Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He was harmonizing with them, and it was very interesting. In the town of Kamanali, which is located near the capital of Orissa, this is the state of Orissa, is where the Jagannath temple and everything is, there lived one powerful mystic yogi named Bisha Kishen. By mystic power, he could perform many wonderful and powerful supernatural feats. He used to sit erect in front of a burning fire, rock back and forth, leaning himself into the fire for a while, and then pulling back out and sitting erect again. He would also manifest fire from the top of his head. He had two companions he named Brahma and Shiva, and he declared himself that he was God himself, Mahavishnu, who had come down to earth in this form as Mahavishnu. All the small kings of Orissa, the smaller regional kings, bowed before his feet and would regularly send him money to build himself a temple. They would also send him women for his Rasa Leela dances. In other words, he would engage in illicit sex with the women that these kings would send him. Later it came out, and this was the final straw, was that the villagers got upset because Bisha Kishane was hypnotizing their wives and things and also taking advantage of them. But Bisha Kishane declared, I will drive away the British administration. I will sit on the throne as king of Orissa myself. He sent a circular, like a flyer, like we have for this seminar, all over in Orissa and Manipur. He had thousands of followers who just were terrified of him, but they thought, oh, this is Mahavishnu. And flyers everywhere. And the British government got a hold of these, and they thought he was plotting a political revolution against the government. So the district governor, under the national government of Bengal, sent out orders to arrest him. Who dared to prosecute? No one had the courage to even touch him or come near him. What to speak of take him to court in Jagannath Puri. A Mr. Ravenshaw, British person, a district commissioner from England, knew and believed in the power of Thakur Bhaktivinoda, who was then the deputy magistrate of Puri. He especially requested and gave him charge of the prosecution of this bogus Mahavishnu. On the other hand, Bhaktivinoda could not get a single man to go with him to arrest him. They were all terrified. I mean, these are the cops and they were all terrified by this Bisha Kishane. I mean, you just get the impression how fierce this guy was. And it was like, wow. So the Thakur went personally by himself to arrest him. Think of the courage of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, so devout and devoted to Mahaprabhu. And duty bound, just on that level there, just duty bound to his job. Bhaktivinoda Thakur wanted to find out what the nature of his power was. He knew it was the power of the mundane world, so he was not in the least afraid. When Bhaktivinoda Thakur approached the yogi to arrest him, Bisha Kishana showed some of his supernatural power and said, Ah, Bhaktivinoda, you are Kedarnath Datta, and you have come here to inquire about my activities, but I warn you not to disturb my activities, for I am the Supreme Lord himself. In other words, he could read and knew his name, and he had that kind of siddhi. Bhaktivinoda Thakur then replied, My dear sir, you are a great yogi. Why are you living here? You should come with me to Jagannath Puri, where you can have the darshan of Lord Jagannath. To that, Bisha Keshana angrily replied, Why should I come to see Jagannath? He's only a hunk of painted wood, whereas I am the Supreme Lord personally sitting in front of you. Bhaktivinoda became like burning fire when he heard this, and immediately physically arrested the rogue who had to submit to the mighty godly power of Bhaktivinoda. There were a few policemen lingering in the distance, and I know this from other writings about this. When Bhaktivinoda Thakur arrested him, a couple of the cops came in and helped him. And the crowd was going nuts because they were all his followers, but somehow he managed to get him out of there. He brought Bisha Kishane to Puri and threw him in jail. Bhaktivinoda put 36 constables and 72 police from Cuttack in charge of guarding his cell day and night. Bisha Kishane was tried by Thakur Bhaktivinoda at his court in Puri. The trial continued for 18 days, and daily thousands of people would gather in the courtyard while the trial was going on and make loud demands for the release of Bisha Kishane. These were his disciples and stuff. On the 6th day of the trial, Bhaktivinoda's second daughter, the 7-year-old Kandambini, became seriously ill, almost to the point of death. But on the last day of the trial before, Thakur Bhaktivinoda himself fell very ill with a high fever and suffered as severely as his daughter did. For the whole night he was awake, and in the morning, with great difficulty, he was carried to the courthouse. By several men had to come and carry him to the courthouse. He couldn't even walk because of the curse of this mystic yogi. Upon beginning the trial, he declared his final judgment: Bisha Kishana should be thrown in jail for 18 months under strict imprisonment for political conspiracy. While Bisha Kishane was being removed from the court, Dr. Walter, a local medical officer, a district medical officer, jumped on Bisha Kishane from behind with a large pair of scissors, cut off all his long hair, upon which Bisha Kishane's power depleted. Bisha Kishane had not taken food or water for 18 days of the trial, so as soon as his hair was removed, he fell to the ground like a dead man without any power in his body. He couldn't even walk. He'd be taken on a stretcher to the jail. After 3 months, he was moved to the central jail at Midnapur, where he took poison and died in the year 1873. By this time, Thakur Bhaktivinoda and the energy of Lord Chaitanya proved that any earthly aggrandizement or power cannot stand before the godly power of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Ki Jai, Jai Jagannath, Jai Jagannath, Jai Mahaprabhu. That is our Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So we can become fearless like him and stand before this phony plague and stand before all these communists trying to force us to stay home and in lockdown, wear these stupid masks, which is proven on record. Look it up, do your research, medical record. They make you, wearing a mask makes you sicker. So what are the communists trying to do? They unleash a disease on us. Then they make you wear a mask, in these communist companies that go along with it. The communist media and the social networks all spread lies and propaganda about the disease. And when people try to talk about how it could have been stopped immediately with hydroxychloroquine and zinc, all these fraud social media companies immediately banned the big conference that was held in Washington, D.C. 2 weeks ago. A group representing thousands and thousands of doctors and surgeons came out and said hydroxychloroquine is a cure for this disease. And they're trying really hard to, but there's all this opposition to that for the very purpose they want to sell you some remdesivir and these very dangerous things that don't work anywhere near as good. Hydroxychloroquine and zinc has a 90% cure thing. The little bit of percentage is because if someone starts too late in the treatment or they're older and they've already got another disease, which is what more than the so-called phony 500,000 case reported. A lot of those are coming from other ailments. People had other ailments, or recently it's all been proven. Guy gets in a motorcycle accident. Oh, died of the coronavirus. It's complete fraud. Listen, people, try to understand this. Realize what's going on. We got to be strong like Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He went by himself, stood up to Bisha Kashain. This disease is like Bisha Kashain, this evil monster. And the people that put it out on us, think about how evil they are. And we know what they do in private. And I'm not going to discuss it here. It is disgusting. You should try to wake up to that. If you're going out and complying with all this mass crap, it's almost over. It's time to stand up and protest. The next few weeks, you're going to see amazing things happen. These people are going to get their butts kicked. So be ready. But it's going to be more rioting by the communist Nazi brown shirts, the Antifa and these people. So be ready. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati came after Bhaktivinoda Thakur. After he'd passed away, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was living in deep isolation doing Harinam Bhajan because he had taken his initiation from Gaur Kishore Das Babaji, who was a great sadhu. He was a grain trader. He was a futures trader like I am for a living. He was a grain trader in his city and had his young wife, and somehow she got bitten by a snake and died. And he was so heartbroken, he became just thoroughly disgusted. And he became a Babaji. He renounced order of life, moved to Navadweep, and there's books about him you can read, just astonishing. Prior to him in the lineage is Jagannath Das Babaji, beloved Jagannath Das Babaji, the leader of the Mahants, the leader of the sadhus, and a close friend of Bhaktivinoda Thakur at that time in the 1800s. Deeply respected by everyone. And Gorky, so this is the Babaji path now starting to solidify after Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who later in life became a Babaji as well in his final years, just wailing and crying Krishna, Krishna, Krishna in his kutir. But coming through this line of Babajis, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who basically his goal was to, pardon the term, but Catholicize Mahaprabhu's teaching, make it very formal and almost like you might call a religion, but in a good way, a very good religion, an honest religion, a pure religion. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, here in a rare photo, wearing kind of a ochre robes, a dark brownish red robes, not orange traditional sannyas like you see in modern day ISKCON and Gaudiya Math. but very rare photo with the whole side revealed here in the sleeve up here. I mean, just I'm examining as a researcher the Vaish of this picture, and very illuminated, happy look of Preeti on his face, in trance on the Lord. You can see the Preeti glance, his eyes, everything, just completely absorbed in the Lord, chanting 64 rounds a day at least. Bhaktivinoda Thakur set that standard, which prior to that, the standard was the Haridas Thakur standard, which was Mahaprabhu also gave too, which was 92 rounds a day. 1 lakh was what Mahaprabhu ordered. Everyone should chant the holy name, count it on beads. It has to be counted. There's some magic in the mathematics. Count the holy name on beads and chant, in Mahaprabhu's case, 1 lakh, which is approximately 92 rounds. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati said 64 rounds minimum, and that's continued by some of the tradition of Bhaktivinoda or Bhakti Pramod Puri and Srila Bodhayan Maharaj are continuing that mode also of things. Srila Sridhar Maharaj, my Guru Maharaj, also continued that, but for the Westerners, he very specifically, this was never been changed. He said for the Westerner, 16 rounds minimum, more if you can, but never the bead should be left to be fasting, which is don't at least chant 4 rounds if you somehow can't chant that day, but don't let the beads fast. And of course, the age of Kali and the Maya and the illusion of the whitey and the Westerners turn that into, you only have to chant 4 rounds, and then they don't chant any, even that. So again, it's, the nature of Maya is it's always the enervating plane, as Guru Maharaj called it, enervating plane, always trying to back away from God and make less commitment instead of more. What in the Vaishnava path, we're always striving to make a deeper and more intense commitment to this practice. So Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati was so great. Here was the man here who was like very vehemently saying, every town and village, the holy name, the chanting, the kirtan, and he had his army of soldiers chanting 64 rounds, going out and preaching and expanding his mission, and expanded very far and wide. He said, now I'll sell all the temples, sell all the marble, everything, to print books and send somebody to the Western countries. So, and again, just trying to give you a brief history about the advent of this great, great teaching that came to us. He sent Bhaktivana Maharaj, Bhakti Hridaya Ban Maharaj, a good friend of mine, was a disciple of his long ago, before ISKCON, just as ISKCON was really taking foothold. And Krishnadas Babaji used to come. Some of you may know him. He used to stay with Vana Maharaj at his temple in Vrindavan. He set up a school there as well, a famous school in Vrindavan. Great, great scholar. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati selected him to go. First, they went to England and Germany, and also they took another sadhu right here, Bhakti Pradeep Tirtha, who was initiated by Bhaktivinoda Thakur originally, and then when he took sannyas was given the name Bhakti Pradeep Tirtha. Very handsome, dignified person, was also a brilliant scholar, came from a practically, not quite, but a very wealthy but almost royal family, surrendered his whole life when he met Bhaktivinoda Thakur during that whole period, of the British royalty and all this, or the British invasion and all this. So Bhakti Pradeep Tirtha went with Hridaya Ban Maharaj, and they actually came back. Ban Maharaj, pictured here, came back with 2 Germans who surrendered and became devotees. I forget their names. History can give it to us. I could look it up, but I neglected to put that in my notes here. Very important, though, how they came back with him. And it wasn't as big of a explosion as they would have liked. And they, it was costly to do that, but you can see very dignified devotees. This was probably, I'm guessing, about the year maybe in the 40s, I'm guessing. I don't know. I'd have to do the research on that. But Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati started this movement with a devotee nicknamed Kunjada. Kunja Bihari was was a postal man. He was an executive in the post office, had some money, and he was friends with Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and he kept pulling him out because Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, after he got the mercy and blessings of Gaur Kishore Das Baba, he went in intense Vairagya, period lasting years, where he just chanting the holy name. He also was a great scholar and a Vedic astronomer. Believe it or not, astrologer and astronomer. He actually plotted things through astrology and astronomy and became known. He had several books out about that and became before he was practicing as a devotee in the sense of he was following his father's footsteps with the scholarly pursuits, but then he became a devotee after begging Gaur Kishore Babaji to give him the initiation. So at that point, Kunjada kept trying to pull him out and say, hey, come on, let's start a movement. I mean, they both conceived this idea of making Gaudiya Math into a preaching movement rather than just a Babaji movement where people have darshan of a saint, they stay and they become Babaji, but rather Mahaprabhu's idea of every town and village tell everyone about Krishna and chanting and bring them to this path and bring them joy and ecstasy in their life. And so this was the start of that in the modern world, past when Mahanam Brati Brahmachari came, and prior to him when the appearance came of all these other sadhus that I've gone over. So we're still cooking here. Premananda Bharati Maharaj and Mahanam Brata Brahmachari were the first two. They were influenced by the people I showed you, the devotees and sadhus. And this, after Gaudiya Math was formed, this was the start. And prior to that, there was one German in India, but he just landed because his plane crashed during the World War. He somehow was taken out of it. He thought it was left for dead, but he got taken out of his airplane and brought to, anyway, became a Gaudiya Vaishnava. And it's a whole story separate from this particular story. Name was Ronald Nixon. Prem, Ronald Nixon was named. He's actually got a job as a professor and met a Gaudiya Vaishnava lady, a young lady, and she became his guru, and he became, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name. Krishna Prem, there it is. The old computer, you know, you just have to download put the search in there in the computer. Krishna Prem, great, but he didn't come from Gaudiya Math, but he respected Gaudiya Math. He traveled all over India too. He met Maharshi Ramanand. He had a little argument with Raman Maharshi and a couple other things. Interesting, many other stories. Now here's what happened. Here is A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. This is when the explosion occurred. His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, came to America with no money, no friends, didn't know hardly anybody except one. The Agarwals were there. They gave him some help, giving some talks and everything, struggling all alone. And again, from those early days, my friend Mukunda Maharaj was there with him, Michael Grant, and they did miracles, you know, helping Prabhupada. And then others came in, Brahmananda and many others. It's a whole history, and there's so many books you can read about the whole history, almost the day-by-day accounts of what happened. It's quite wonderful, very refreshing to read those stories for encouragement and nourishment. But his Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, I was a devotee. I started around 1974, and I just knew this was something that I wanted to learn. And I had enough going on after a couple of years of going to the temple and eating the prasadam and hearing the chanting that I'm going to go to San Francisco. They're having a Rath Yatra. I think it was the second annual Rath Yatra, if I recall, maybe third. But I went there and I took this cheap little camera, you know, that I got at Kmart. And I said, I know he's there, that guru of this movement, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And I went there, and in the midst of a crowd, I have a picture nearby that shows the whole crowd. I mean, you can see it was absolutely packed. And I snapped that photo from that inexpensive camera, And years later, I didn't develop the photos for a while. Developed them later, and I didn't even notice. And I looked carefully at one once. And I said, "Wait a minute! Look at this photo. There's Prabhupada." I put a microscope, those round things on him. I forget what they call them, and I saw he's gazing right at me. And then I blew the picture up, and this is what the Prabhupada is so kind and merciful in the midst of all that crowd. And there's a lot of trannies up there. The transvestites in San Francisco always come to all these festivals. They liked Hare Krishna. They dance around, dress as women, and the whole thing. Um, but I'm saying them and a lot of hundreds and hundreds of devotees and regular visitors. It was a mix of and hippies, a lot of hippies back then. Still, it's 1974. Hey, the summer of love just only ended a few months before, but it was, or a few years before, but it was still happening. Anyway, in the midst of that huge crowd, His Divine Grace, I like to think that he was giving me a Shaktipat glance, a mercy glance to help me on this path. And I still look at this picture every day and light a little Agrabati and just, offer my obeisance. I'm so grateful that he helped me in that way. Way back then when I was just completely, wondering, what's this about? Who am I? The early stages of trying to come out of Maya into the clarity of Krishna consciousness. Here's a picture of Prabhupada having a good time with the brother of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. It was a long time after Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had passed away, but they're there. He came with some disciples and they're having a good time. And I was told by someone who, they were only there in the room, but he was told by someone who was sitting nearby the room in New Bengali, because they're trying to figure, why is Prabhupada laughing so much, having such a good time? And you can almost tell by the expression of his face is that his name, Lalit Prasad. He was a son of Bhaktivinoda Thakur and a great devotee of Lord Chaitanya. And he's meeting with Prabhupada, and he says, I'm here and I only have one or two people helping me. I'm getting a little older. You have so many nice men here. Look at all these men you've brought. Can you leave me a few? And Prabhupada was laughing at that idea that, can you leave me a few? Because this type of trading was always going on in India. When they would see all the white devotees, they would ask Prabhupada, please leave a few of your men here to help us. And Prabhupada just laughed and thought, get your own. No, I'm just kidding. They're very friendly, close relationship. So this is one of the well-known pictures of Prabhupada sitting in the Vyasa-san, just gorgeous. And all he had to tolerate from us in the beginning, people, anybody who's starting brand new in this, but many sadhus came to him too, like Gaura Govinda Maharaj, who was, Prabhupada said, when they said, they had this election of 11 people, but the documents show that Prabhupada mentions the word Ritvik 8 times in his documents, that he signed personally, that it's a GBC committee of 11 people, and they are Ritviks. They are Ritviks of me. They will initiate as Ritviks. It's mentioned 8 times in the documents. I have a copy of them here. I can send it to you if this is of interest to you. But they've naturally, politicians do this. They'll take something and turn it into a bad word, like a swear word, like sahaja, which means great and deep purity. Well, you hear sahaja, oh, he's just a sahaja. Or you hear Ritvik, oh, they're Ritviks, the Ritviks, ooh, the Ritviks, and all this crap. This is going on, but Ritvik is mentioned 8 times in the documents he personally designed and signed personally as to how the movement will be managed after he's gone. Not trying to get controversial, just a historian, just telling you the facts, just try to learn the facts. That's all that matters. And here, another great saint in the lineage of Lord Chaitanya, Sri Hari Georgeson, who was, I'll keep it here for a minute, and then I'll show you the full picture in a minute. Little important story here. Hari Georgeson was so important to Prabhupada, not because he was rich and he was a famous musician. He was one of the Beatles. I mean, there was nobody, and still nobody this day, ever got as big as the Beatles. And there's a lot of talk, but nobody ever even got close. And George Harrison and all the songs they wrote and everything was so wonderful and such a sweet person in many ways, but he wouldn't take any bullshit. I mean, he was very tough with people. He wouldn't take any crap. but he loved Prabhupada and he's called him my guru. And once he went and visited the Afro Sheen Sai Baba, not the real Shirdi Sai Baba, but the Satya, he went and visited him because there was all this talk about him for a while. He went and visited him, and people were coming up to him saying, "Oh, he's your guru." He said, "No." He said this publicly with all the cameras there, and he said, "No, he's your guru." Satyabai says, "No, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami is my guru." So he was really impressed and sold out to him as a disciple. And Prabhupada called him, "He is my archangel." Now, George knew that was true because he felt Prabhupada was the archangel come to destroy. And there's this whole theology around Archangel Michael and his destroying of the dragon, which represented the demons. Similar, it's like a Hiranyakashipu, Nrsimhadev type of story. Archangel Michael, which is pictured in this statue here in George's castle. Archangel Michael destroying the dragon, the snake, the demon of the world, the one who put out this disease on all of us and making us wear these phony masks, which only make us sicker. Shouldn't wear those masks. They're only going to make you sicker. And that's why the Satanists who ran this whole thing have made forcing you to wear masks because they know the disease will spread more and people get sicker. I mean, anyway, second, but it ties in with what I'm saying here. George Saracen, Prabhupada gave the name Hari Georgeson. That was his initiated name. He's a Vaishnava devotee of the Lord. And one has to wonder if My Sweet Lord song, which became such a huge hit, and it's still, I go into the drugstore, the Rite Aid or whatever, and it'll come on the radio, singing Hare Krishna, everything. It was never edited out. And George took a lot of heat for that, but he surrendered his life there. And when Prabhupada called him his archangel, it meant so much to him. And so there's this really rare picture I want to show you now. Now, guys, try to just keep your focus on 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 the picture here now, if you can. George and Patty, his wife, and Prabhupada. So he put this picture of Prabhupada in this symbolic picture. Prabhupada sitting at the archangel on this picture, showing here's the real archangel. But Prabhupada called me his archangel, but I say he's the archangel. Well, at the time of death, Srila Prabhupada, this is a mysterious story. It's like the lost, the Tolkien, the Ring series. At the time of death, Prabhupada took off this blue sapphire ring that was made for him specifically for astrological reasons, health reasons, by my good friend Hrishikesh Ananda, who lives in Thailand now, who's a master jeweler and creator of Vedic designs. Made this blue sapphire ring, very valuable. Prabhupada wore it ever since Rishikesh gave it to him. He took it off his finger and said, "Give this to George Harrison." And he passed away shortly after that. And the big question is the mystery of the rings. What happened to the blue ring? What happened to the blue sapphire ring? I don't know. I've done my research, dug into it, and everybody shrugs their shoulders. Most didn't even know that story I just told you. Most devotees don't even know that story, what to speak of what happened to the blue sapphire ring. Maybe she took it. I'm just kidding. Anyway, Patty was okay. She's still around. George passed away. Prabhupada's eternal and forever. I like to think George is, if you listen to his music, and whenever I hear My Sweet Lord, when I go into the drugstore, the grocery store, I think, George, you are eternal. You'll never die because you were the one who really took it to the moon. You took Hare Krishna to the moon. And one has to wonder, I mean, Lord Krishna's all kind, Lord Chaitanya's all kind, but you really, really have to wonder if George Harrison, Prabhupada, who called him his archangel, why did he call him that? He didn't call any other of his devotees that. Why did he call him that? Because he probably inside, I'm guessing, this is a little bit of an opinion here. I promise I wouldn't give you I just being a devotee a long time and thinking about these things, probably was thinking, he's my archangel. Had he not come, had Krishna not sent him, how could our movement have grown so tremendously like this? Because of his recognition as a Beatle and a musician. And then, of course, when he went solo, he had one album called Living in the Material World, which is just gorgeous. And then the My Sweet Lord, which was such a huge hit. So very important part of Krishna consciousness, Lord Chaitanya's mercy come to America, a great sadhu dressed like a sadhu, lived like a sadhu, mostly, like, everybody beginning the practice, especially with all his samskaras and everything. He lived his life as best as he could, but hey, he was a rock star. Give him a break, right? Jai George Harrison. Next in the lineage of coming to America, and this is the end of the line, in terms of the history, the seminar is almost over. It went a little longer. Apologies for that. We'll have question answers if you have any later. But Srila Sridhar Maharaj, when a small group, a private group of devotees who had been practicing the teachings of Prabhupada for a long time, read all his books, been chanting Hare Krishna for years, a small group asked him, out of natural desperation, what will we do when you're gone? Prabhupada said, you can take Siksha from my Siksha Guru, Srila Sridhar Maharaj. I consider him to be my Siksha Guru. What to speak of the benefit you can have. So he permissioned us, those who were sincerely following Prabhupada and following that sadhana and practice, he said we could go to Srila Sridhar Maharaj for continued education. Now, of course, a little controversy, which I'm not a controversial person, but my view in looking all this over and being there when it all happened, not in the room when Prabhupada said that, but the way ISKCON was in, where they take any little thing he says, like once he was on an airplane, the the waitress in the airplane offered him a drink, and the one devotee said, try a 7-Up. Prabhupada, okay, took a 7-Up, took a sip of it. He said, oh, very first class drink. Within 2 days, everywhere, all over ISKCON, oh, Prabhupada says 7-Up is a first class drink. And I'd go to devotees' homes and their refrigerators have 5-6 packs of 7-Up. 7-Up, Prabhu? And everybody, it was so corny. Everybody's sitting there going, Jai, Prabhu, 7-Up? Oh, yes, of course. Thank you, Prabhu. And then you touch it, you're Jai, 7-Up. It was really dumb, but I'm just saying that was the way ISKCON was. Still kind of is, but back then it was even more so because everybody hung on the words Prabhupada said. So I believe that there was a small meeting, maybe of sannyasis. Someone came out and told somebody that, and then all of a sudden, like the 7-Up story I just told you, everybody says, oh, Prabhupada says you go to Srila Sridhar Maharaj for further instruction. And the people had not already completely read and studied Prabhupada's book, which I have. I've read the Chaitanya Charitamrita 5 times through, but now, I read it. I'm still, quote, reading it, but it reads me. After you read these books, Bhagavatam, everything, at first you think you're reading them. That's the ego. But then after a while, you become purified and you realize they're reading you and showing you how much further you have to go to make advancement on this path. Humbleness is the key to this path. But so that's what that recommendation was for people who had already been chanting Hare Krishna on beads, 16 rounds for, many, many years and studied all the Prabhupada books. They could go to Srila Sridhar Maharaj. And the original people that did go there and are still there running that side of the movement, it's all Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement, were those type of devotees, senior devotees who had been sannyasis in many cases and studying that. This is a picture before Guru Maharaj passed away. He's still in pretty good shape in Kamuran. When I met him, he was 91 years old approximately. And I'm so happy because on one devotee's Facebook page I was directed to by Chintamani, I found this picture of Guru Maharaj there, and he's wearing this shirt. And he gave me this shirt when I first went there. I had a television show called Insights, which had grown and grown and grown and become very popular. I was teaching Vedic philosophy, Bhagavad Gita, Chaitanya philosophy, some yoga. And Guru Maharaj, I had put a show on like the one we're doing here, sort of, but on TV, on television, because that's all we had back then in the 80s. It was 1980 was when I had the show. 1980, I had it on for about 86 years. And then they required me to spend, $100,000 on all this fancy equipment. And then I'd have to have a technician. I couldn't afford that. And I didn't want to, it was just a TV show. I was able to broadcast at a very low budget, and we had an average of 500,000 viewers every time it went on, which was twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, right at 6 o'clock. I had prime time and everything in 5 states throughout America. So I had this show that I'd done on Srila Sridhar Maharaj, who was such a great Sastra Nipuna, which means Sastra Nipuna means scriptural genius, which he was, but he had an absolute heart of gold. He was the literally um, was so devout and such a great bhakti yogi. That's why Prabhupada was his close friend, and he considered him his Siksha Guru, even just under Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, which he was a disciple of. And the point is that he, when I went to India and to meet him, and he found out that I had this TV show about him, and he called me in his room and he told me directly and personally that Prabhupada, our Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, was a Saktiyavesh avatar. And he repeated, I cannot but take him to be so. And he repeated Shaktiyavesh avatar 3 times. It's a mystical way of locking something down in truth. Shaktiyavesh avatar, Shaktiyavesh avatar, Shaktiyavesh avatar. I cannot but take him to be so, which is his British kind of way of saying, I cannot take him any other way than that. And he was so senior in Gaudiya Math, you have to recognize the internal humbleness of someone so senior in the mission as a sannyasi, so senior to A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, but because of his revelation and revelation with another sannyasi who had the same one, and one relatively unknown sannyasi, a Babaji named uh, I'll get you his name for the next seminar. I want to do a seminar on him, who was a friend of Prabhupada outside living. He was living in Radhakund, also at a different time, in a different place, unknown to Srila Sridhar Maharaj and other, also from knowing him, told that he was a Shakti of avatar of Lord Nityananda. And his disciples out, and he talks about this nowadays. This guru, Radha Govinda Babaji. Radha Govinda Babaji was his name. He's a friend of Prabhupada, and Prabhupada loved him. And he told his disciple, you should leave me and go take initiation from Prabhupada and learn from him. Then come back to me later, after some time. That was his instruction. But the point is that Guru Maharaj, when he heard that I had this TV show about him, Srila Sridhar Maharaj, gave me this shirt. He had this shirt for a long time. He loved it. You can see him wearing it here. And I was so grateful when Chintamani, our beloved host here, yeah, Jai Chintamani Devi Dasi, she told me to go to this Facebook site, and I saw this picture of Guru Maharaj. And since I got the shirt back in the 80s when I had the TV show, all these decades, I've longed and thought. I actually gave it up after a while because I longed for 20, 30 years. Oh, don't I have a picture of Guru Maharaj wearing the shirt? How could I get it? Because he gave it to me. He was basically, discarding it in the sense that it had become too small for him, but he had worn it for so long, like 20 years or something. And Govinda Maharaj was trying to get him a new one. And so give this to Krishna Mohan Das. He did this TV show, and thank him for me. So she guided me there. This is the nature of Krishna consciousness. Circumstance, one thing leads to another, just like that cool song back in the 80s. One thing leads to another. Play that song and pick up on it. One thing leads to another. Never give up. Never get despondent. One thing leads to another. And this path here that I just showed you today leads to this divine lineage of all these gurus. You can go in and research them all, and it ultimately leads to this. And that is Guru Maharaj saying, Jai Jagannath, Jai Mahaprabhu, Jai Sri Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Now all you got to do is repeat that 3,700 times a day like I do, and you'll be the happiest person on earth. I've been doing that 32 rounds since the mid-70s after I took a trip to Kauai. And I don't know, it just got in me. Somebody just put something in me. The Lord put something in me, and I all been doing that. I had never talked about it. Just now I'm mentioning it, but I've never mentioned it. But I'm doing it now in my older age because I want to encourage devotees. And not a night goes by since that time going on 40 some years that before that head hits the pillow at night, I've chanted 32 rounds, or there's no sleeping. I don't care if you got work, you got this, you got that. Forget it. Must do it. You must do it. Must do 16 rounds. This is the order of our sampradaya. If you say you belong to sampradaya, you must chant 16 rounds a day. And it's out of pretty love. It's out of great, great happiness and joy. It's pure ecstasy. Oh, what's more important to do than have ecstasy? Whatever you're doing, drop it. Go have your ecstasy section with the Lord. Now, the perfection of that, just a little mini class on this on chanting japa. Prabhupada said many, many, many times the term. You maybe have heard this if you're a student of his and you've studied his works carefully, listened to a lot of his tapes. Sit down. I say simply sit down tight and chant Hare Krishna. And later he elaborated. What he means is do your whole rounds, sit down tight, one spot, hardly move. Just sit down very tight means don't move like a yogi. Sit down tight and chant your whole allotment of rounds, 16 or in my case 32. I made a vow. I'm trying to increase it, but I tried for a couple weeks there, and I need to be completely retired to do that. I'm still working full time. I work as I have an advertising business, and I also work as I told you earlier, I'm a um, researcher by trade, have been for a long time. So anyway, this is how it ends, and this is where I'm saying the path leads to ecstasy in this priti, divine love of Radha Govinda. And if you chant as much as you can, 16 rounds to 32, or like Haridas Thakur, 92 rounds a day. Of course, that'll take your whole day. You won't be able to eat much or sleep or do anything else. Won't have time to look at your social phone. But what I can assure you is this, is that eventually it all leads to divine communion with the Lord, and eventually the Lord will stand in front of you and give you personal darshan. And when it happens, we'll all be in great, great shock. So thank you for joining with us today on this seminar, and thank you so much. And we can end the recording there. Jai can end the recording there.